I'm going to show you how to make REST API calls to Aria automation. Let's get started.
Hi everyone, I'm Watrous from VVork. If this is your first time here and you want to learn about automating, programming, and monitoring in VMware environments, you're in the right place.
This is part 9 in a 10-part video series in which we're exploring how to make REST API calls. In parts 1 through 8, we took a generic look at how to make REST API calls. But now, in parts 9 and onwards, we're going to take a look at specific VMware products. In part 9, we're going to be taking a look at how to make REST API calls to VMware Aria automation. In this video and the next few videos, we're going to take a look at how you can use the REST API to look up information about the infrastructure that you've set up in Aria automation. Additionally, you can use that REST API to create new infrastructure. Before we start, let's take a look in the GUI to see what we're talking about when we talk about infrastructure. As you can see, I'm logged into VVork Automation, I'm in Cloud Assembly, and I'm going to go to the Infrastructure tab. In this interface, you can go and create what are known as projects. Additionally, you can create things such as cloud accounts, which we see down here. And we can create cloud zones and image mappings and flavor mappings. All of those and more comprise what's known as infrastructure. So now that we know what we're talking about, let's go back to Postman and take a look at the two different REST requests that I've already defined. One of the requests is called About Project Service. Now, this URL is similar to, but a little bit different than something we saw earlier in this video series. Earlier in this video series, when we first started talking about VRA, we pointed out that this request here, get API info, would allow you to look up information about what versions of the Aria automation REST API are available for your particular environment. I keep talking about the REST API, and that's a little bit misleading because in Aria automation there are actually multiple REST APIs. There's a different REST API for each different subsystem within Aria automation. That's why when you go to developer.vmware.com/APIs, you see a whole bunch of entries labeled vRealize Automation, REST API, this or that. This request here with this endpoint URL is getting us information about the API versions available for the IaaS subsystem. And that's a useful thing to know. But this REST request with its endpoint URL, you'll notice doesn't say IaaS, rather it says project-service, because this is the REST operation that's defined if you want to look up information about the versions of the project service REST API. When we run it, it's very similar to the get API info REST request. You run it and it responds, check the status code. It responds with information about the versions of this API that are available. So nothing particularly new about this REST request. It's very similar to what we saw before, but this is specifically for the project service. What we really want to see though is this get projects REST request. Let's actually run it and see what the results are. So looking at the results, we got a 200. That's good. We got a bunch of response here. Let's copy that and we'll take that over to Notepad++. I'm going to type Control-V to paste it in. I'll type Control-Shift-P and Control-Shift-J and Alt-0 to collapse everything over there. So let's look at the response body. The response body has a bunch of properties here that have to do with the paging. We've talked about paging in an earlier video. But crucially, it has this array here called content. If we expand content, you can see that there are two entries in the content array. Let me go show you what those two correspond to. So I'm going to go back to the GUI, and in the GUI, you'll notice that I am in projects. And you can see two different projects called VMW-Engineering and VMW-Finance. Two projects here, and therefore in Postman, or here I've copied over to Notepad++, we've got two different entries. If we open up one of them, notice that this here, element number 0, is the entry for the project called VMW-ENG. On the other hand, entry 1 is for the project called VMW-Fin. Now, as you can see, there's other information in here, such as the description of each project, when they were created. You can also see for projects, projects allow us to define what users are going to have access to what resources. So if we go into members, we can see all of the users and groups of users that have access to this particular project. Just randomly picking one of these here, there are actually 10 users. In this case, there are 10 users who have access. The guy who's in this slot here is a user called eng-orc-admin. On the other hand, if you just want to know which of those users are administrators, that's what the administrator array is about. Again, if we open up one of these 7 different administrator entries here, we can see the name of one of our administrators. Additionally, you can see who are supervisors. So those 3 last arrays are for listing different types of users. But we also have this section here called properties. Under properties, you can see 2 different things. One has to do with the naming template. I'll explain what that means in a moment. And the other has to do with what's known as the project's placement policy. In order to understand what these 2 are, let's go take a look at one of our projects in the GUI. Let's open up the VMW-ENG project. Again, here on users, we can see the 10 different users and which ones are administrators. Again, this is the information that we just saw. But I'm going to take us to provisioning, where, as you can see, in a project, you can describe what cloud zone or cloud zones this project and its users have access to. Additionally, you can define what's known as the placement policy. And that's what we just saw listed over here. Let's find that again. So we are set up to use the default policy. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you want to know what these 3 different choices are, the handy dandy little info icon here will give you information about each of those. I'll let you hit pause if you'd like to study these, but essentially the placement policy determines when Aria Automation deploys new machines through this project, and it has a choice of where to deploy the machine. This placement policy guides Aria Automation for how to place the newly deployed machines. Should it spread them? Should it spread them by memory? And so forth. The other thing that we can see in here, if we scroll down a bit, is a section titled Custom Naming. So custom naming is a mechanism in Aria Automation that allows you to instruct it how the names it generates for the machines it's deploying should look. In other words, this is where you specify your naming convention. So VMW-ENG- $curly pound 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 close curly means that all the machines that are deployed through this project are going to be called VMW-ENG- followed by a 4-digit number. So again, as you can see, there's loads of information here. If you want to, you can go to View and choose to unfold all, and you can take a look at all of the information here in this response body. Now, one last thing before we wrap up this particular video. The example that I just showed you used the get HTTP method, but you know 2 things. One, you know that instead of doing a get, you could use another method such as post. In that case, doing a post with the same URL would create the definition of a new project. So you know about different HTTP methods, and additionally, you know how to go look up the documentation for this specific REST API. Again, if you go to developer.vmware.com/APIs, even if you're running Aria Automation, currently the documentation on that page lists all the APIs as vRealize Automation REST API. So depending upon when you see this video, that documentation page may still say vRealize Automation, or it may say Aria Automation. But by going into that documentation at developer.vmware.com/APIs, you can look up all of the operations that are available to you through the project service. Join me in the next video and we'll continue looking at the Aria Automation API.